Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda and I'm so glad that you could join me today. Today we're going to continue on with our series looking at different religions, their beliefs, their practices, how they came to be, like everything. And today we are actually going to start. Well, it's kind of weird. So we're going to start the tangent that's going to talk about the different movements in Christianity or the different denominations in Christianity. However, the first one that we're going to talk about is not Christian. Okay? So I found this amazing flow sheet, if you will, that helps discern some of the denominations in Christianity. Now, there are over 400 different denominations of Christianity. I'm not going to go through them all because I'm sure that you don't necessarily want to see all those different ones. But we're going to talk about some different questions and we're going to talk about some of the main ones. So, without further ado, let's hit the intro and begin. So, we're going to start talking about the different movements in Christianity. And when I came across this great flow chart explaining some of the different movements and their different beliefs, I was surprised that it started with a religion that's not Christian. And digging a little bit deeper underneath the surface, I completely understand why, and you will in just a moment. So without further ado, let's just jump into the questions on the flow sheet that will help us understand what our first religion is going to be today. So the first question is, does your practice follow the teachings of Jesus Christ? Okay. Certainly, if you follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, you're a Christian. Okay. So we're going to take the no side just so we can see what that other one was. Okay. If you follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, you're a Christian. If you don't necessarily follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, you're not a Christian. However, there's a second question. The second question is, did Jesus Christ exist? Because there are religions that believe that Jesus Christ existed, maybe not to the level of Christians where they view Jesus Christ as part of the Trinity or the Son of God. Maybe they see him as something different. If they existed, if Jesus Christ existed, well, you might be Christian still, because there are also Christian denominations who believe Jesus existed, but they don't necessarily follow what he preached because they hold true to what God said, and they'll take it in a different way. Okay? If you don't believe he existed, well, yeah, you're not Christian. And that question for me probably was the biggest change through my experience. So I was a Christian for over 40 years, probably just barely over 40 years. And I always struggled with Jesus and needing Jesus to be my interlay for my connection with God. And I started reading books and I just came to this idea, well, maybe there was a Jesus. Maybe there is multiple people who did good things and they're kind of lumping them all together and they're saying, oh, these actions are Jesus, or they're calling Jesus this action when it really wasn't that person. I don't know if he existed or if he didn't exist personally, but I know I don't need to follow him to have a relationship with God, me personally. Okay, let's move to question number 3. This is a big one. Was Jesus Christ a prophet? Okay, so there are some religions that say, yeah, this person named Jesus existed. He was a prophet. He was this wise person who spoke different things, but they don't put him as part of the Trinity. Okay? They could be Christian denominations. They could be offshoots of other denominations that are not Christian. One of them being what we're talking about today. If you say, well, yeah, Jesus Christ might have existed, but he wasn't a prophet, then you're clearly not Christian. You're not following what he's saying. You don't view him in any high regards. He's just another person. You're typically going to be in a different category. And today we're going to talk about that category, which is Islam. Okay? So Islam does say that Jesus Christ existed. They say that he was a prophet, but they don't necessarily give him any more regard or hold him in higher esteem than other prophets. And as a matter of fact, they hold a different prophet higher. And it's just interesting. So let's talk about Islam. Islam is the second largest religion in the world. It's huge. It's huge. It's 1.8 billion followers currently. Now, the surprising thing is, Islam is the second largest, but not that many people really understand what they believe, how they practice, all those different things. So hopefully this video will help enlighten some of us and help raise our awareness, if nothing else, because if you don't know, you won't grow. And that's what we're all about here, right? So Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, and when you meet someone who is Muslim, who practices Islam, they will typically say, peace be upon him afterwards as a sign of reverence whenever they say his name, okay? I'm not Muslim, so I won't be doing that. But if you are Muslim, I respect that and feel free to state that every time I say Muhammad. So the religion of Islam, or the Muslim people, believe that the Islamic faith started by this man named Muhammad. Okay, Muhammad was born in Mecca in 570 AD. Now, slight tangent. AD stands for Annoi Dominica, or the year of the Lord. Okay, so there's different versions. AD meaning anybody that came after Jesus, also known as Common Era or CE, just like BCE was before Common Era, or some people say BC meaning before Christ. It's just different ways to say it. As I don't focus. Yep, that was a cat. Just in case you're wondering, there's no earthquakes going on here in Wisconsin. I refer to it as AD. I'm sorry, not AD. I refer to it as BCE and CE because I don't focus on Jesus. Yeah, that's just me personally. So in 570 CE, Muhammad was born. Now, they say that the idea for Islam came to Muhammad when he was alone in a cave. Okay? Now, my amazing boyfriend has this fabulous way of explaining things that sheds a little bit more light on it. He says to be weary of anything, any big thing that happens when you're alone, because you can't fully rely on someone's version. And this story highlights that. So this person is alone in a cave. The story is that the angel Gabriel came to Muhammad when he was meditating in a cave. Okay? He was meditating in this cave. Apparently, per the story, he started sweating and he started convulsing, and he had this dream, meditation, vision, whatever you want to call it. And the angel told Muhammad, he ordered Muhammad to recite the word of Allah, meaning he gave Muhammad the Quran. In this cave, while he was meditating, he's shaking and sweating. Okay? Muhammad is illiterate. He cannot read, he cannot write. But because the angel wrote the Quran on his heart, he knew it, and he could then tell it to other people so that they could record it so it could be shared with other people. Okay? So he received this massive revelation, and basically he went back and he talked to a scribe and he wrote this down, and then throughout the rest of his life, he continued to have revelations. And one of the revelations was because he received the Quran, he was going to be the last great prophet. There wasn't going to be anybody else. It was going to be him, and then it was going to be the resurrection. So that's what he did. In 1613 CE, he then began to preach the message that he had received. So he was born in 570. He received it sometime in there. 1610. 610 he received it. 3 years later, when it was written down, he received a couple more. Then he decided to start teaching about what he received. Okay? So that's how they believe Islam started. Now, if you believe how it started, great. If you don't believe how it started, great. That's your choice. That's how they say it started. Okay? You can have questions. That's okay. You can have strong faith in what it says. That's okay. I'm not here to judge. I'm just sharing what I learned. Okay? Moving on. So that's how Islam started. Okay. Now, where it is today, being the second largest religion in the entire world, is similar and yet slightly different because every region has it slightly changed. So let's talk about what they believe, because at their core, they all believe some of the same things. Okay. So the main thing they believe in is they believe that there is one God and their name is Allah. Okay. They are very monotheistic, means there are no partners, no equalities with God. So that's a difference of opinion from some of the Christian faiths, where they think that there's that Trinity where there's God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, and they're all on the same level. They say absolutely not. There is one God, Allah, that's it. Now, that correlates to other religions as well, as far as, so in Islam, Allah is one God, that's it. Great. In Judaism, there's one God, and that's it. Adonai, Hashem, is one God, many names, one God. In Judaism, it's just different. In Buddhism, there's multiple gods. It's different. In Islam, it's a monotheistic. There's one God, his name is Allah. Okay? Moving on from that, in Islam, they do view that there are prophets. So they say prophets are humans that are near perfect. Not completely perfect, but near perfect, but there is no part of them that is divine. There is not anything that makes a person special that makes them more likely to be a prophet. It's not like if somebody has this father or this family train that they're more likely to be a prophet. That's not what they believe. And they believe that prophets were used to receive messages from God. Sometimes the messages were good, sometimes they were not so good, but that's what they believe. Now, similarly, Judaism has prophets. Christianity sometimes has prophets, depending on which denomination you believe. So Islam has prophets. They have one God. One God. They have prophets. Prophets are nearly human, not divine. And then Islam also talks about angels. Okay? Angels send messages to the humans that are less than perfect, and they are not close to being prophets. So basically, if you were not near perfect, if you could not be at the level of a prophet, but God needed to send you a message, he would then send an angel to deliver that message to you. Because if you were a prophet and you were near perfect, you were closer to him and you could receive that message directly. But if you had errors in your judgment or things like that, then you were a little bit more removed, and he needed to use an angel to help deliver that message. Okay. Everything in Islam is guided by the four main sources or principles. So there's four of them. They are guided by Quran, what was received by Muhammad. They are guided by traditions, because these traditions are really recorded common laws, very closely followed in some of the tribes, a little more discarded in other tribes. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on as far as the different divisions within Islam. The third one is consensus. So they believe that there's a power in group thinking and the local authority. If the local authority and the local area has established that this is the expectation, then that will be the expectation that should be followed through. If you live in a different part of the world and they have a slightly different expectation, then you would then have to follow that expectation. So there's that. And then the fourth is individual thought. In Islam, through my research, they put quite a bit of emphasis on making sure that that's a personal choice to participate in Islam, and you should be very humble and really be honest with who you are and where you are so that you can have an authentic relationship with that. So having that individual thought, you have the ability to question some different things and believe some things slightly different as long as you follow the common laws and the general consensus in the Quran. Okay? Four main principles or ideas that they follow. And all of that is also tied into what's known as the 5 pillars. This is huge. All of Islam, regardless of which tribe you are part of or which division you are part of or how you practice, the 5 pillars are huge. They are the meat and potatoes, if you will, of Islam. Okay? 5 pillars. There is one group who adds a 6th one, and we're going to talk about that. However, that 6th pillar that's added is typically not accepted by the general Muslim community. It's just accepted by that one tribe. So pillar number 1 is a profession of faith. So they believe that when you convert to Islam, there is a certain phrase that you need to say to officially be part of that community. That phrase it's not a hard phrase. It says, there is no deity but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. So again, Muhammad started Islam, so they put a great focus on Muhammad. So in their initial statement of professing your faith, you focus on the one God and you focus on Muhammad. Because if you were focusing on the one God but you didn't believe in Muhammad, well, then Islam wouldn't be for you. Make sense? Okay, let's move on to the second pillar. The second pillar is prayer. Prayer is very important to the Muslim people. In their home, at work, in a group, by yourself, in a mosque, prayer is very important. They will do their prayers 5 times a day. So they'll do it at sunrise, at noon, late afternoon, sunset, and then they will do it before bed. And then there are some exemptions, like if you're traveling, you can combine a couple of them, but you should still pray at least 3 times a day. And it's not even just the prayer. They pray in a very specific way. Sometimes they stand, sometimes they cover their face, sometimes they kneel, sometimes they kind of lay on the ground a little bit. And basically all those different movements are to show their humility and their willingness to be obedient to God, to serve, to show their humbleness and how they really respect and appreciate all that He has given them. So people who are Muslim will pray 5 times a day. Before they pray, they will set up their prayer area. So there's typically a mat that they'll lay down, and they have to be facing in a certain direction. They have to be facing towards Mecca. And there has to be no symbols, no anything with a face. The room basically has to be mostly empty so that they can focus on their prayer and not be distracted by anything or give the perception that they are praying to something. So if I was to pray in here, I couldn't have these decorations up because it may appear to other people that I was praying to one of those too. Okay, so that's a big thing for them. There's also before they pray, so they have their room set up, they do a process called wudu, and that's basically a ritual cleaning. They'll wash their hands, they'll wash their face, they'll wash their feet, different things throughout the day. If you're at work, they may wash their feet before they put shoes and socks on, because there's different rules and regulations about that. But there can't be any barrier, and basically that process of wiping, that ritual wiping, is washing away their sins or their aggressions or things that they have done that have not been to the highest standard thus far in the day. So every time they pray, it's kind of like trying to refocus on God and starting anew. And quite honestly, when I was doing Sunday school and confirmation teaching, and I would teach about the other religions, the prayer and that concept of realizing that you're going to make mistakes and you have the opportunity to restart multiple times during the day, that was the part that I enjoyed most about Islam. That's the part that I thought was so moving and touching, that it was so honest and real. It struck a chord with me. And I liked it a lot. When they are in a mosque and praying, so a mosque is the name for their worship space, they typically will pray, depending on how big of the group is that is there, in lines and rows so that everybody can focus in the same way. You wouldn't want someone to be obscuring your view, so you're all going to be focused in the same way. Okay. Yeah, it was very interesting. When I went to a mosque, we were able to observe their prayer service, and men and women are separated. At least we had like an accordion type door. You sometimes have a fabric, or sometimes there won't be necessarily a physical divide, but all the men will be in the first part and all the females will be in the second part. And there's not necessarily a physical divide, but there is a great deal of space to create that space to give respect for God, and that you're not going to tempt other people. When they did the prayers, it was intriguing because I didn't have a clue what they were saying. They chanted a little bit. It wasn't singing and it wasn't necessarily talking. It was chanting. It was like a rhythmic reading of the prayer, and they would cover their face and they would genuflect or bend at the waist, and then they would also prostrate or kind of lay on the ground, like they would sit on their feet and kneel for a little bit, and then they would kind of lean forward and lay more, and then they would do the reverse. And all that motion, they couldn't tell me exactly what the words were, and I don't know if that was because they didn't want to tell me or they physically couldn't with their English abilities what they were saying. But basically, when they were explaining it, they're doing the different movements to show that humility and that respect to God. That's as much as they could explain it to me, and I thought it was beautiful. I just wondered what they were saying. That was just me. So that's the pillar number 2. Prayer is very important in the Muslim community. Number 3 is the tax or voluntary charity. So they view helping their community as very important. So in some, there is an annual fee that is paid, whether through food or property or gifts, on like a yearly basis. On others, it's more of like an individual choice of what you feel you're able to and desire to give. Whether you give to the mosque and they give in a whole, or you give to individual charities, that's dependent more on where you reside. But I like that they care about their community and they feel that they have a duty to help those that are less fortunate and those that live where they live, how they can help each other. I like that as well. Number oops, I'm sorry. No, in Saudi Arabia, want to note this. In Saudi Arabia, the tax or voluntary charity is actually very strictly enforced. It's not up to you, whatever you feel you can do or how you can give it. It is very strictly enforced. You'll be told what you have to give and either who to give it to or where to give it. Just different areas responding differently. Okay. The number 4 pillar is fasting. Fasting, they feel helps them focus on Allah or God. They feel that when you take away the desires of eating or enjoying pleasures of different things and you spend that time focusing on strengthening your connection with Allah, He will reveal more good things to you. You'll become a better person because you're focused on Him and not yourself. So fasting is huge. They have Ramadan, which is a month-long practice. And basically they fast from sunup to sundown. And different people will fast no food, no water, no food, no water, no bathing, no sex, no things like that. They'll have different levels that they may fast, but typically no food. No food at all. Some say no water. Some say water is okay depending on your different things. Then again, if you have certain life situations going on, that fasting can be postponed or made a little easier depending on your situation. So if you are ill, you're exempt. If you're traveling, if you're breastfeeding, if you're on your menstrual cycle, or if you have an eating disorder, because they feel that if you were going through that ritual fasting, that could do more harm than good. And they want to respect that and make sure you're taking care of yourself. Okay. And then the 5th pillar is pilgrimage. It is believed that every Muslim should at least once in their life, preferably annually, make a trip to Kaaba, which is in Mecca. They believe this is a very important place where heaven and the power touches earth. Okay? They believe it was built by Abraham. So particularly during Ramadan, there will be a lot of people that make this journey to this place. They then, after they make that journey to Mecca, then they'll go to, there's 2 other spots. One is where Muhammad received the Quran, and then the other one is the holy place where Muhammad is buried. So they're going to go to different places to have these different experiences. Now, if you are going to Kaaba, okay, where this big thing is, here's a couple of things you should know, because these were interesting and I want to share them with you. If you're going to Kaaba, if you're making this pilgrimage, there's a special garment you have to wear. Okay, it has to be a certain color. It's typically made of a certain type of fabric. It's a very special and it's very symbolic to the Muslim people. You need to avoid sex for 24 to 48 hours beforehand so you can be pure for going on this holy land. Okay, you need to avoid cutting your hair or nails, and you also need to avoid any strenuous activity within that time period. Again, you need to be pure. It's interesting. When they go to Kaaba, they're going to circle around this area. They're going to circle around this stone 7 times. 7 times. It's a lot of time. And then they're going to likely kiss this black stone to bring that holiness closer to them before they leave. So if you were to watch, you will see like a little migration of people going around. I didn't realize that they were going around 7 times. Quite honestly, I thought it was 1 and done. I was wrong. So they go to Kaaba. They're going to wear special things, do special things, circle around, kiss the stone, and then they go on to the next place. Very interesting. So that's pillar number 5. Now, I told you earlier that one of the tribes or one of the different sects of Islam has a 6th pillar. So the 6th pillar is jihad. And jihad stands for internal struggle. Okay? Again, this is only accepted by the jihad tribe. The other tribes very much generally say no, absolutely not. In the 6th pillar, they believe there is war for the faith against the unbelievers. They believe it's their job to promote Islam and bring awareness of Islam. Okay? I like the idea that it's giving information. I don't like that it's war with. It seems harsh to me. And then the other portion of it is how do I word it? They have acts that they do. There's different things that they do. And it's basically a result of the struggle within themselves, with their ego, to get over themselves. It's not about them. It's about promoting Islam. Now, you may have heard of like jihad terrorists and things like that. It's basically to bring awareness to the non-believers about Islam and the power that Muhammad and Allah have and how everybody should join Islam. And it's that internal struggle that they have. That's the 6th pillar. Again, one tribe believes it and follows that closely. Another one does not. And yes, there was a cat again, in case you were wondering. Still no earthquakes here. So different beliefs. Some of them are very intriguing to me. And I really loved learning about it. Some of them don't quite fit with me, and that's okay. So in Islam, they also have views of what happens after you die, just like many different religions do. In Islam, they don't believe necessarily in reincarnation. They do have a day of judgment. They believe that when you die, it actually begins what's called the trial of the graves. Okay? And they believe that when you die and you're buried, an angel will come and they will ask you different questions about religion and prophets and God and what you believe. And if you are a follower of Islam, you'll be visited by the angel of mercy. And they'll ask you easier questions and help smooth your path so that you can end up in the good place. If you are a non-believer, you will be reached by the angel of punishment, who's going to ask you harder questions, and it'll be much more difficult to pass the test, if you want to call it that, okay? They believe that there will be a day of judgment, and on that day, they believe that all beings that were buried will raise to life for one initial judgment, and at that judgment, you will then have your final fate be known. So even after you die, your family can change your overall fate. But once that day of judgment comes and everyone is raised from the dead, that's it. Can't do any more. No more extra credit. No more anything. Your judgment is your judgment. Okay? So that's what they believe. Now, when it comes to heaven or hell, they have their own versions, okay? So, if you are a believer, they believe you cross over this bridge that crosses over hell, and then you live in paradise. Okay? So, if you're a believer, basically all the acts that you did helped build this bridge that was over hell to help you get to paradise, okay? If you're a non-believer, you're held accountable for all of your actions, and you're basically thrown into the pit of hell for rejecting and obedience and being insubordinate to God. So if you are if you're a follower of Islam, you're building this bridge that goes over hell. If you were a good person but you didn't follow Islam, you weren't being submissive enough, you would be thrown into the pits of hell. Now, if you were a good person but you didn't follow Islam, you might have went to a little bit higher level of hell, but it would still be hell. Okay? Both of them, like I said, have levels. Both are, so there's higher levels, lower levels, anything like that. They believe that both are real. They believe that there is a heaven, there absolutely is a hell, and that paradise or that punishment is everlasting. It doesn't end. If you are in hell, you will forever be in hell. You may be on a different level of hell. You may try to get higher in the levels of hell, but you're not going to be able to essentially work your way up out of hell and get into heaven, is what they believe. Or my understanding of what they believe, I should say. Yes, very, very interesting. They call heaven sometimes Jannah. That's just another word they use for it. And the Quran describes it as a beautiful garden, and it's close to Allah. It's filled with dignity and satisfaction and pleasing sense. I just thought that was an interesting way to describe it. As a Christian, I was always picturing something different, but I wasn't picturing pleasing sense in particular. But I guess sense can be very powerful, and certainly there are scents that would not be pleasing. So just interesting the way the Quran spoke of that. Now, when it talks about hell, the Quran describes it as a miserable existence of constant suffering and shame, fire for those that caused mischief and neglected Allah, worse than any horrible place imaginable. Again, the imagery. It's just interesting to view heaven in those terms. It's interesting to see what different religions view as heaven and hell. Now, when you talk about what they believe, it makes you kind of wonder, okay, what is their worship like? I am very fortunate that I had the opportunity to go to a mosque and participate, and not really participate, I could observe. Okay, I could observe, and it was interesting. So we talked about prayer being very important. They do it 5 times a day. There'll be congregational prayers that they will do on Friday afternoons. It's typically required of males and encouraged by females, because sometimes females need to get things ready at home and they can't come. That's just what they are. Definitely there is fasting that is important in there. There's giving to charity, and there's that trained submission to Allah and whatever Allah wants. And that crosses over into even marital and societal relationships. So men tend to be viewed as higher or more protective. So by submitting to her husband, you are submitting to Allah. And so that's why most of the females in Islam are more submissive in nature. The mosque is where they would go typically for Friday night services, and then they also frequently have services on Saturday. There are 2 different people, depending on your mosque, who may be leading service. One is known as the imam, and that would be basically the person who does the prayer services, okay? There's no formal process to becoming an imam. For a small congregation, they're typically just the most knowledgeable person. So they've practiced Islam the longest. In a larger congregation, there might have been some additional schooling, kind of like a theology degree or something like that. It depends on the size of your mosque. And then the second one, I'm going to maybe mispronounce it, I apologize, is the Karibib. And this is the person who offers the sermon or the meditation, okay? The only requirements is that it's a man and they're Muslim. Well, and they're an adult. So an adult Muslim male can give a sermon. So basically they read a portion of the Quran, and then they'll talk about how that applies to their life, what they're seeing in the world and how that can be taken to heart and make their lives better. Okay. Very, very interesting. In the Friday prayer service, they'll typically read a portion of the Quran, they'll pray, they'll talk about their portion that they read, and then they eat. Because community is important in the Islamic tradition, they typically have meals together. And again, meals are a great breaking ground, because you can develop those relationships. And as a Muslim, there are certain dietary restrictions that you follow as well. So they follow if the food is halal or haram. So halal is allowed and haram is not allowed, essentially. Pardon me. And that's basically that. So there's different foods that they would eat. So as a community, they come together and they eat together. Just in case you're wondering, the things that are not allowed is the carcass of a dead animal. So if you see a deer on the side of the road that was hit, because it's Wisconsin and it's hunting season right now, so there's deer all over on the road. If there's an animal that is dead already on the side of the road, you can't eat that meat. Okay? They don't believe you should be eating pork, and you should not be eating any blood in it, and you shouldn't also consume any intoxicating drinks, among other things. Just so you have an idea of what the dietary requirements are. There are two main thoughts when it comes to different customs and how they practice. So there is the Fard and the Sunni, okay? So the Fard say they are commanded by, there are two different aspects or customs when it comes to Islam and how they carry out their lives. So the Fard is mandatory or compelled by Allah. So this is actually in the Quran. This is what it says. This is what you have to do. Okay? So the only thing in there is that adults have to pray 5 times a day. Now, again, if a woman is on their menstrual cycle or postpartum, they are completely exempt from that because they are deemed as unclean. They can't wudu to get rid of all their impurities. And basically blood or bleeding is one of those things that makes it unclean. You can't pray. If you are in the hospital, for example, you should and are expected to still be praying. You just can't necessarily do the prostrating and the genuflecting and moving. You can just sit quietly and do it in your chair or in your bed if you need to. And the second portion of the customs is the Sunnah, or the Sunni. And basically those are teachings from Muhammad that they're practices that they do and they embed in their lives to kind of emulate Muhammad because they view that he was the last great prophet. They view that Jesus, was around. He was a good prophet. He wasn't the last great prophet. He wasn't even on the same level as Muhammad. So they want to be as much like Muhammad as possible. So they do these things. So they eat with their right hand, for example. Okay. They do the wudu before prayers. They break fast with meals. And they have to behave as Muslims. So the way they conduct themselves in public is part of that portion. So again, that consensus rule. So if, for example, you live in a country that believes that all females that are married should be covered completely and obedient to their husband, then they'll be covered completely and they'll be obedient to their husband. There are some countries where the woman cannot go out independently from their husband. There are different practices and different expectations in different communities, but they believe that as a Muslim person, you should be carrying and living out your life as a Muslim person. You shouldn't try to kind of go along with it and pass as another religion, okay? So another thing that they do in honor of Muhammad to kind of emulate him is they use water to clean after using the bathroom. Toilet paper, nope. Flushable wipes, nope. Water. They care for their neighbors. awesome thing. And they also show kindness and mercy to others. So they try to be very connected with their environment and their community and helping be supportive. Okay. We talked about the dietary laws. We already talked about the pilgrimages possible, the pilgrimage as well. We're talking about that you should do that pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life, preferably yearly, depending on your location. That might not be feasibly and financially possible. They believe in marriage. A man can have up to 4 wives. However, he has to treat them all equally. If you buy a car for one wife, you have to buy every wife a car. If you buy one wife a house, all of them get a house. If one wife gets their nails done, which is interesting because they can't get their nails done, they have these little metal rings that they'll place over their fingers, because the nail polish makes their fingernails not permeable, so Wadu cannot go all the way down to every aspect, inch of their core, so they can't get completely clean. But they'll have these little rings that they put on their fingertips, and that's how they will do their nails. But if they do any self-pampering like that, and the husband provides for one wife, he has to provide it for all the wives. In some practices, in order to get an additional wife, the original wives have to agree. In some, they don't. In some, the wife has a say. In some, they don't. The thought is that the woman controls the household, but the man has the final say. So if the mom says no jumping on the bed and dad comes home and says, it's fine, we'll jump on the bed, well, then they're jumping on the bed, and that's okay. Again, it's part of that submission thing, that respecting the leader and Allah is the leader of all, and then your husband is supposed to be trying to lead you closer to Allah, so you have to submit to that as well. Husbands are held accountable for their wife's actions in public. So if you are in a space where the women are expected to be covered head to toe and not draw attention to themselves, and their veil fell off, or they were drawing attention to themselves and causing a commotion, their husband would be held accountable for those actions. And some of those actions can have quite drastic consequences, whether it be fines, whether it be confinement in a prison, or even physical punishments, things like that. But men are held to that higher standard because they are supposed to be teaching their wife what to do. And then husbands are in charge of the safety. So that kind of carte blanche gives the husband the ability to control their wife in all aspects in the name of safety. So we talked a little bit about their safety. One of the things that you think of with Muslim people is the way they dress, and that's part of modesty. That's in the Quran. They dress that way because they want to be modest. They don't think they should be showing different parts of their body to members of the opposite sex, particularly those they're not married to. There's also different expectations as far as a married man will not shake a female's hand, and vice versa. It's just a respect thing for their different spaces, and giving that closeness attention to those that deserve it, so their husband or their spouse. In modesty standards, typically men have to cover from the navel to the knee, and women, the only thing that it says in there is that they have to dress modestly, and then they're supposed to cover their hair from the time they reach puberty. Now, different cultures will view that differently. Sometimes you'll wear normal clothes, but you'll have just a head wrap on. Sometimes you'll have a head wrap and more of a loose fitting gown. Sometimes you'll have a face veil. Sometimes you'll have a full coverage from the top of your head all the way down to the bottom of your feet. You'll have things on your hands, and even your eyes will be covered with like a mesh type fabric, so you can see out, but nobody else can see in. Different different expectations for what you're supposed to dress like depending on your community that you're living in. There is people in the Muslim community that say that my husband can't tell me what to do and I wear this because I feel better about it. And I would imagine that there are those people who say, no, it's my choice to wear this. And I also imagine on the same hand that there are probably situations where that may not be their choice to wear that, but they do it because that is what the husband has indicated he wants. And to be submissive, they will do that as well. It's just my understanding that that's what it is. Okay, but that's as far as modesty for the females and the males. Very interesting practices in Islam. Let's talk a little bit about if you want to be converted into Islam, what does that really take? It's not as hard as I anticipated it would to be, quite honestly. Basically, you need to be sure of your beliefs. You need to know, understand, and believe with all your heart, soul, and mind that Allah is God and that Muhammad is the prophet, the last and final prophet. Those are the two big things. If you have that, then you're probably 80% there, I would say. Okay. The next thing that they suggest you do is to read the Quran and read the Islamic scriptures so that you really have a better understanding. After that, they suggest that you talk with an imam, somebody who is well versed in the Islamic culture and who has practiced as a Muslim before, so they can give you some guidance. And then you make your intention with the Shahada. It's that prayer that was said earlier. When you say that prayer, you're Muslim. Okay? You are then a Muslim individual. Many people will then take a shower to kind of wash away their former self so they can step into their Islamic life on a clean slate. Okay? Males also will typically be circumcised for cleanliness. Not necessarily, so like in Judaism, people will be circumcised to signify they're part of the tribe and show that they're that dedication. In Islam, males will be circumcised purely for cleanliness factors. If you're not a Muslim, then you don't need to be circumcised. Moving on. After the shower, then they need to just basically take care of their Islamic principles. They need to pray, they need to do obligations, they need to follow the Muslim etiquette, they need to embody the 5 pillars, they need to believe in the different articles of faith, they need to be a practicing person of their Muslim identity and their faith. They can't just say it and then continue on like everything else. That's just not part of what they are. So the conversion is not difficult. It's not that long. It's a lot to learn. It's a lot to understand. But if you believe that there is one God and you believe that Muhammad is the last and final prophet and that he came and gave us all these great scriptures, then Islam may be for you. That may be for you. And that's great. If it is for you, I'd love to tell you about some of the divisions that have occurred because there are different groups or tribes that make up common day Muslim communities. Okay, so there is 5 main tribes. Okay, so the first one is the largest group. It's about 89 to 90%, and it's called the Sunni. Okay, this is the Sunni tribe. This is located mostly in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. What you'll notice is there are slight differences among these tribes, but they are typically grouped by geographical location. So Sunni is in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and they believe that Muhammad, when he died, did not appoint a specific successor. Okay, they believe that Muhammad was the last and final prophet. There is nobody else that's coming after him. Okay, They also believe that the Quran applies to all of life and individuals can approach God directly. They don't need somebody to serve as an intermediate, that you can approach God directly. Okay? The second group is the Shia, and they reside mostly in Iran and Iraq. And they say that Muhammad did choose a successor. They say that when Muhammad died, he said his son-in-law would be the next person to kind of lead and guide the people. Okay? They also believe that imams, those intelligent people in the mosques, are central figures and leaders because they are the perfect manifestations of God. So in the Shia tribes, imams are reserved and revered because they are the perfect manifestations of God. That's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure. The third group is called the Badi. They live in Oman, and they are lesser known, but they are actually one of the oldest. They predate both the Sunni and the Shia, and they are considered very highly orthodox versions. They believe that the Muslim community can rule itself. They don't want a leader. They don't want anybody else from outside trying to tell them what to do. And they believe that the leader doesn't have to be a descendant of Muhammad. So it doesn't matter who is their community leader. They don't want an outside person coming and saying that they're opposing their rules. They believe that the Muslim people should rule the Muslim people, and it doesn't matter who that leader is. Okay. The next one is the Ahmadi. I might have mispronounced that. Largely concentrated in the West and East Africa, Indonesia, and South Asia. So that's kind of widespread. It started, this is an offshoot. So Islam was started by Muhammad. This group in particular was started by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in 1889. Okay, so they believe that this Mirza came to this realization that he should be the reformer and renewer of Islam, that he was the second advent of the Prophet Muhammad and Jesus combined. Okay? And they believe that he would respond to his name, he would respond to the second coming of the Prophet Muhammad, he would respond to the second coming of Jesus. He also responded to a couple of other different titles. But they don't recognize Muhammad as last and final prophet because they believe this Mizrahi was a prophet. Okay? And they have many practices because they're following somebody new that's not Muhammad that, quite honestly, are rejected by the other Muslim groups. Interesting. And then the last group is the Sufis. Again, I butchered it. I apologize. It's located predominantly in Turkey and Persia. But they also have groups in Greece and Albania. And they're focusing on purification of the inner self. So really focusing not necessarily on the community, but getting yourself better. And they say that humans can have experiences with God through intuitive and emotional abilities. So they focus very heavily on meditation, like Muhammad did, so that they can focus on themselves. Whereas many of the other Muslim tribes are focused on living their life and bringing peace and awareness and things like that. This group particularly is focused on themselves and focusing on that meditation to bring peace within. Now, interestingly, when I was researching this religion, the Islamic tradition, I was also anticipating to find out about, okay, well, how did the Sikh become part of that? Because I thought the Sikhism was part of the Muslim faith, and it's not. That was probably one of my biggest surprises in this research. So I'm actually going to go on a little tangent we'll get back to the Christianity, I promise. But my next video is going to be talking a little bit about Sikhism and what do they believe, because they're not Muslim. They're not an offshoot of Muslims. Many people in society think they're connected because they have many outward appearances that seem similar, but they're two very different religions and practices. So if you liked today's presentation, go ahead and hit like and hit subscribe so you can see our next presentation. I thank you so much for joining me today to learn all about Islam. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something. Maybe you have more questions, which is awesome, because after all, the more we know, the more we grow. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.